In the final desperate years of the Second World War, when skies above Europe were dominated by American bombers and swarms of escort fighters, a new silhouette appeared, sleek, sharp, and unlike anything the U.S. Army Air Forces had ever encountered. It wasn't a propeller-driven machine, it was a jet. The Messerschmitt Me 262, known to the Allies as the Storm Bird, tore across the sky faster than any piston-engine aircraft could hope to follow. For the first time, American pilots faced the terrifying realization that Germany had leapt ahead in aviation technology. This wasn't just another Luftwaffe fighter. It was a glimpse into the future of air combat. At first sight, reports filtering back from the front described an enemy aircraft that seemed almost otherworldly. Crews returning from missions over German territory spoke with awe and dread of an interceptor that appeared suddenly, struck with blinding speed, and then vanished before they could react. For American strategists, who had grown confident in their air superiority by 1944, the Me-262 was a shock to the system. It suggested that the balance of power in the skies might be shifting, even as Germany was losing the war on the ground. To the men who first witnessed it, the Me-262 seemed almost unstoppable. Its twin Junkers Jumo 004 turbojet engines propelled it beyond 500 miles per hour, easily outrunning the P-51 Mustangs and P-47 Thunderbolts that had dominated the skies. For bomber crews, its appearance was nothing short of a nightmare. Tail gunners fired desperately, but the German jet was often gone before a bead could be drawn. The first impressions of America's airmen were clear. This was not a fighter to be taken lightly. It represented both fear and grudging respect, a machine so advanced that it seemed born decades ahead of its time. For American engineers and analysts, the arrival of the Me-262 was more than a battlefield encounter. It was a technological earthquake. When wreckage of downed aircraft was examined and intelligence reports began to circulate, U.S. experts were stunned by what they discovered. Germany had not only built the world's first operational jet fighter, but had managed to field it in combat while Allied air forces were still flying piston-driven designs. The Me-262's core strength lay in its propulsion system, two Junkers Jumo 004 turbojets. Each engine delivered unprecedented thrust, giving the aircraft top speeds exceeding 540 miles per hour. To Americans accustomed to Mustangs topping out around 440, this was a leap so dramatic it felt like science fiction. Its acceleration, dive rate, and energy retention far outclassed anything in the Allied inventory. This wasn't just a step forward, it was a generational leap. The jet's swept wings and heavy armament only added to the impression of raw, unmatched power. Equipped with four 30mm Mk-108 cannons, the Me-262 could unleash devastating firepower in seconds, shredding bombers that took years to manufacture. For U.S. bomber crews flying B-17s and B-24s, the knowledge that such a weapon prowled the skies above Germany injected a new level of anxiety into every mission. One pass from a 262 was often enough to send a fortress spiraling to the ground. Yet American engineers also noted its flaws. The Jumo 04 engines, though revolutionary, were fragile and prone to failure. They had lifespans measured in hours, not months, and required maintenance Germany could no longer provide consistently. Takeoff and landing were perilous, as the engines responded sluggishly at low speeds, leaving the aircraft vulnerable to attack by Allied fighters. Pilots needed experience and finesse, and Germany was rapidly running out of both. To U.S. analysts, this contrast was fascinating. On paper, the Me-262 was the ultimate weapon, the embodiment of technological supremacy. But in reality, it was hampered by desperate wartime conditions, fuel shortages, and inexperienced pilots. America recognized its brilliance, but also saw its Achilles heel. The jet was not invincible. It was a marvel trapped inside a crumbling war machine. When the Me-262 finally took to the skies in meaningful numbers, American pilots and bomber crews quickly realized just how dangerous this jet could be in combat. Reports from Europe described encounters unlike anything the U.S. Army Air Forces had faced before. Bomber formations that once felt secure under the protection of Mustangs and Thunderbolts suddenly found themselves vulnerable again as the jet tore through the skies at speeds the escorts couldn't match. Its combat debut was devastating. A single Me-262 could dive into a formation, unleash its 430mm cannons, and disappear before American fighters could even react. Bombers that had withstood waves of Focke-Wulf 190s and Messerschmitt 109s were shredded in seconds. Veterans of countless missions admitted they had never felt such helplessness, because no matter how skilled, no gunner could hit a target that moved this fast. But combat was also where the jet's limitations came into focus. American pilots quickly learned to exploit its weaknesses. They were instructed to target the Me-262 during its most vulnerable phases, takeoff and landing. Airfields housing jet squadrons were marked for relentless bombing raids, and P-51 squadrons were ordered to patrol nearby skies, waiting to pounce when the German fighters came in low and slow. Many Me-262s were destroyed before they even had the chance to reach combat speed. The Americans also noticed that while the jet was unmatched in raw speed, it wasn't as agile as prop-driven fighters in tight turns. If a Mustang managed to catch one by surprise, the advantage could be reversed. Dogfights between Me-262s and P-51s became a test of timing. If the American could trap the German jet in a low-speed maneuver, the outcome shifted dramatically. For bomber crews, however, the presence of even a handful of 262s transformed missions into nerve-wracking ordeals. Knowing that at any moment a jet might appear, unleash a devastating burst, and vanish left many airmen shaken. To the Americans, the Me-262 in combat was both a nightmare and a fascination, a weapon that showed them the terrifying possibilities of aviation's future, even as they worked desperately to neutralize it. For American airmen, the Me-262 wasn't just another opponent in the skies, it was a psychological weapon. Its sudden appearance over Europe in 1944 shocked crews who had grown confident in their dominance of the air war. Missions that once felt routine were suddenly filled with uncertainty. Bomber groups that had flown through relentless waves of German fighters began whispering about the new jet menace, a foe that seemed to belong to another era entirely. The speed of the 262 was the root of this anxiety. Pilots who had mastered the tactics of air combat found themselves powerless when the jet streaked past. It seemed untouchable, immune to the tricks and maneuvers that had carried American fighters to supremacy. Bomber gunners, who had survived countless attacks from 109s and 190s, now faced an adversary that often entered and exited their firing arcs before a trigger could even be pulled. For many, the experience was less like combat and more like being stalked by a phantom. The psychological strain extended beyond the air crews. U.S. intelligence officers, generals, and policymakers all recognized the symbolic power of the Me-262. It represented a terrifying what if. What if Germany had unleashed this jet earlier in the war, before its industrial base was shattered and its fuel supplies dwindled? What if thousands of 262s had swarmed the skies in 1943, when American bomber losses were already crippling? These questions haunted strategic discussions, filling reports with both admiration and dread. Even propaganda was affected. German officials boasted that the jet would be the miracle weapon to turn the tide. For American forces, this created a dual psychological challenge. Pilots had to confront not just the machine itself, but the myth surrounding it. Each encounter carried more weight than a typical dogfight because both sides believed the jet symbolized the future of warfare. And yet, as awe-inspiring as the 262 was, its psychological impact ultimately worked in America's favor. The terror it inspired only strengthened the resolve to crush Germany before the weapon could change the war's outcome. Every sighting of a 262 reminded U.S. airmen of the stakes. that they weren't just fighting for the present, but to ensure that the enemy's future never became reality. When the guns finally fell silent in 1945, the Messerschmitt Me 262 had left behind a legacy far greater than the number of victories it achieved. For America, the jet was both a warning and a revelation. It proved that the age of propeller-driven dominance was over, and that the future of air power belonged to the jet engine. Though the 262 arrived too late to alter the war's outcome, its influence on post-war aviation was immediate and undeniable. American engineers wasted no time studying captured examples. Teams from Boeing, Lockheed, and Republic examined the wreckage and test flew intact aircraft. They marveled at the swept-wing design, the power of turbojet propulsion, and the firepower it carried. The lessons learned directly informed America's next generation of fighters, the F-80 Shooting Star, the F-84 Thunderjet, and ultimately, the legendary F-86 Sabre. Each of these designs bore the fingerprints of insights gained from the 262. For U.S. pilots, the Me 262 became a symbol of what could have been. They respected its innovation, but also recognized how Germany's desperation crippled its potential. Poor logistics, fragile engines, and inexperienced pilots had limited a machine that might have otherwise ruled the skies. To Americans, this underscored a critical truth. Technology alone doesn't win wars. Industrial strength, training, and strategy are just as vital. Culturally, the aircraft remained etched in memory. Veterans spoke of the first time they saw a jet streak past, recalling it as the moment they realized aviation had forever changed. Historians, too, pointed to the Me 262 as one of the war's most iconic what-if weapons, a machine that could terrify even in defeat. Its psychological and symbolic weight outlasted its tactical effectiveness. In the end, America's thoughts on the Me 262 were a mixture of admiration, relief, and determination. Admiration for its cutting-edge design, relief that it had entered combat too late to turn the tide, and determination to ensure that the United States, not its enemies, would lead the world into the jet age. The Stormbird may have been born in Germany, but its true legacy was written in the skies of the Cold War, where America flew faster, higher, and stronger because of what it had once feared.